Big vibes, stay blessed or stay less. It's your boy Black Finesse. We are here to watch Heavy Spoilers. Now, don't shoot me. I just watched Saving Private Ryan this weekend. I just watched it for the first time in my life. I was born in '98, okay? I, to this day, have not watched it, but I just now watched it this past weekend, but I watched it twice. First time on my own, second time with my partner, right? And I gotta say, the movie was dope. Like, it was ahead of its time. Like, for it to be in the late 90s, you would have thought it came out in like 2012 or 2013. Like, the graphics were awesome. I ain't gonna lie. Like, they did their thing with this movie. You know, condolences to the fallen soldiers of World War II. But this is a doggone awesome movie. But let's see what some things we missed.
Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul. In this video we're breaking down Saving Private Ryan. This is easily one of the best war movies of all time, and it's actually a film I argued was the greatest war movie ever made on Amazon's screen test. That was back in March 2021, and though I love it, it's a film I haven't gone back to until doing this breakdown. Revisiting it has blown me away, and there's so many details and things that you might have missed in it. At its core is a story about war, and also the cost that often comes with it. On the show, it was argued that so many of our heroes died just for Ryan, and therefore it's not exactly a positive message. However, I argue that it shows the reality of war and highlights the sacrifice that so many give. Millions died for just me and you to live, and we should be like Ryan, who appreciates what they did. The movie asks what one man's life's worth, and we can tell Ryan's really tried to make his mean something. It's a point that I feel the movie really hammers home, and please just give me a minute of your time to shout out our sponsors, and then we'll get into it. Now, this video is sponsored by Call of War, an immersive, authentic, free online PvP strategy game. Choose a real country to lead during World War II, where you can fight up to 100 other players in real-time games. The offer's only available for 30 days, so make sure you don't miss out and click that link in the description. Thanks. Now, the film begins with Ryan and his family visiting Captain Miller's grave. This takes place at the Normandy Cemetery, and it's only in hindsight that we learn who this is. We're meant to believe that this is actually Miller, but there's a little clue to the old man's identity. On his jacket there's a pin from the 101st Airborne, which, if you know, then you know who this guy is from the start.
Of course, you couldn't really see it.
The movie's actually based on the real-life Nyland brothers, who hail from Tonawanda, New York. All four served during the war, with three believed to have died in combat. After their reported death, Frederick Nyland was sent back to the USA, where he completed his service at home. Now, I say believe because it was later revealed that one of the brothers had been taken to a POW camp in Burma. That was Edward, who was a Japanese prisoner of war who was eventually liberated in 1945. He lived until the age of 71, with Frederick living until he was 63. The other two brothers are buried in the cemetery alongside the other soldiers who sadly lost their lives at Normandy. Preston was a lieutenant who stormed the beach, while Robert was part of the Airborne Division. At the 28-29 minute mark, we zoom in on a backpack, and this is what highlights the name driving the movie. Now, that obviously inspired things, but they changed up the names so they weren't beholden to the truth. That includes the creation of Captain John Miller, with him being fictional along with his headstone. Miller was a nod to the film The Guns of Navarone, with David Nevin's character being called that as well. Still, though, the movie is accurate at the time, with it causing lots of issues for real-life veterans. This got to the point the Department of Veterans Affairs set up a support line for traumatized veterans. According to IMDb Trivia, the German actor who dubbed the elderly Ryan was also a veteran of the Normandy invasion. He got to see the scenes and ended up dropping out due to it bringing up so much trauma for him. It's an absolutely devastating scene that throws you in at the deep end and grabs your attention immediately. Spielberg used 17,000 bullet squibs to bring it to life, with the effects team rigging the rifles with special sensors. Upon being fired, they sent a signal to the squib, which then detonated to make it look like a realistic hit. The opening was mimicked in several other pieces of media at the time, with it being heavily used in the beginning of Medal of Honor. I remember playing it and being blown away by it, even if now it looks a little quaint. Upon doing my research, I found out that Spielberg had a hand in it, with him being a consultant and producer at DreamWorks Games. Now, he joined Miller alongside his band of brothers and can also catch Tom Sizemore's Horvath. Here we see him chewing tobacco, which is something that he does throughout the movie. Horvath carries a pouch with him throughout filled up with that slowly goes down the further in we get. During his last stand, he takes the final bit out of the pouch and chews it before his character's then killed. Subtly lets us know his time's counting down, and it all picks up from this opening. He then says,
"Want to see plenty of beef between men. 5 men, It's a juicy opportunity. One man's a waste of ammo.
Moments later, we see a machine gunner shooting one man, which subtly hints why they lost the battle. This was a tactic used in real life because it either led to one or two positive outcomes. If a man was spread out, a crowd would draw fire away from him, and thus he'd be able to make it to the front. However, if the enemy shot at him, the crowd could advance instead, so either way, you'd have someone at the front. On the boat, we also meet Private Jackson, who is the company's sniper. Throughout, we can catch a black mark on his thumb, which isn't under the injuries that soldiers used to get. This bruise was caused when a digit got caught in the loading mechanism of an M1 Garand, and it became known as Garand Thumb. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to blur most of this stuff, because YouTube's been demonetizing the channel a lot.
Yeah, from what I've seen it, like, a lot of them said that being too close in a group together would be a bad idea because it's easier targets. Now, if you spread out, it might be different. But then again, it's a hit or miss. It's a problem. It's like a possibility or a small chance you can really be noticed. But it's like being in a group, yeah, it's harder. But being spread out, I feel like it's like you have to make sure you're not in sight. Like, I don't know, bro. Like, if you're out in the open, you're probably an easier target. I don't know, bro. That's hard.
Recently, on A Clockwork Orange, we got demonetized for showing a piece of art that looked like a man's sausage.
Hey,
so
yo.
yeah, we can't really take any chances. However, there's some real attention to detail, with Spielberg employing a lot of things in the background to show the dangers of war. Things happen like a medic's canteen getting shot, and you can notice that water then starts to spill out of the back of it. This then turns into
the
blood,
medics.
showing that he's been hit, but he just hasn't realized yet. It then goes into
I
a
didn't
moment
peep
where they
that.
manage to stop the bleeding on a soldier, who then takes a bullet directly to the helmet. Just before he's hit, you might notice that there's sand all over the helmet, and this then gets completely knocked off by the impact of the bullet. These days, they'd probably CGI most of it, but Spielberg used over 1,000 extras. 30 of them were amputees, which allowed it to seem like their limbs were blown off. Most of the others were made up of members of the Irish Army Reserve, and they even used 2 real World War II vehicles that were present in the conflict. Hanks said it was horrendous to film, and though this was shot in Ireland, he eventually also filmed things in Omaha. Hanks said he walked from one end of the beach to the other, seeing if there was any sign of what happened there. He said, "There's memorials all scattered along, and you stop and you read each one, and at the end of it was this plaque on the concrete retaining wall, and that was us. We were Charlie Company of the Rangers. And to see that there, after what we'd gone through, this kind of thing, it was kind of rocked me. Made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. And walking back to the very famous cemetery there, I just realized I was
can't
in a holy
imagine
place." You kind of get that eerie feeling of a holy place
trauma
too,
they
with
went through,
barricades
bro.
resembling crosses turned on their sides. Here they offer the soldiers salvation and protection from the bullets that rain down mercilessly from the towers. It's extremely authentic, and you might not even realize that they show things from Miller's point of view, where we can see things through his eyes.
A lot of
and
people were
also hear him
dazed.
breathing. As we learn, Miller's a teacher, and we get a clue towards this later on. He says war educates the senses, which is a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. At the church, he brings up how Ryan better be worth it, and he needs to be someone who creates a longer-lasting light bulb.
He'd better go home.
People, I need y'all to comment real quick. Was he shaking from anxiety, or is this like a health condition problem?
Cure some disease or
Because the shaking, I don't know if that was
This has
anxiety.
made many think that he taught science
'Cause he had that
too,
before
though
it even
he's
started.
repressed his love for the academics in order to fight the battles. Originally, they wanted to flesh out his backstory and really start to go into what it is he did. However, Hanks argued against it, and eventually Spielberg decided to cut it down. This idea of repression seen early on when he tells a soldier with a typewriter to get rid of that crap. Later on, Upham asks him if he can bring his, but he doesn't allow it.
Can I bring my typewriter, sir?
Even though he has his academic side to him, he clearly doesn't feel like it fits in with the war. This is why I believe he doesn't tell his backstory, and it's something the characters wonder about in the movie. Now, both Mel Gibson and Harrison Ford were considered for the role, but Spielberg settled with Hanks in the end. I think it makes him feel like a more grounded guy who's sort of an everyman thrown into a war. A cut line in the script also says he suffers from PTSD, which is why we see his hand shaking when we first meet
so
him.
was he in the
It really
original,
helps you to
like,
imagine how you'd handle
previous
this
war?
situation, and because he's more relatable, you
Previous part of the
experience
war?
it just as much. Against all odds, they manage to push through using Bangalores and make it to the point beyond the German bunkers. As Jackson goes to fire at the bunker, he starts quoting the Bible, and we see soldiers on the battlefield being read their last rites. I believe this is based on Father Francis Sampson, who was known as Parachute Padre. He spiritually lent a hand to those on the battlefield and even gave his own blood through transfusions to save lives.
Really?
He was the one who was dispatched to find Nyland, and he gave him the paperwork that allowed him to go home. Fritz then travelled back to New York, where he continued to be stationed as an MP. As they go over the top, we can see two soldiers surrendering, who the soldiers here eventually end up shooting. Sadly, if you translate it, they say, "Don't shoot, I didn't kill anyone, I'm Czech." Czechoslovakians and Polish people were taken prisoner in the conflict and then forced into joining the German army.
That is true.
It adds an extra gut punch to it because there's even the possibility that Miller might have understood it.
What? I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying. What do you say? Look, I washed for supper.
Dang.
Mellish is also given a Hitler Youth knife, which is something that he's been desperate to get.
Look at this, a Hitler Youth knife.
And now it's just about Holocaust, right?
This has some ironic foreshadowing to it, as Mellish is later killed with one at the Battle of Rommel. Cut of the condolence letters being set out, and it's a heartbreaking scene seeing how many are being written. It's here that the name Ryan is noticed, and is that Bryan Cranston? It hits them that the mother's going to receive all 3 death notices on the same day, which is something that also happened with the Nylands. They received all 3 within a short space of time, with Fritz's letter also arriving on the same day. He said, "Dad's Spanish-American war stories are going to have to take a back seat when I get home." IMDb trivia stated Fritz didn't know what had happened to his brothers, and this story of course then inspired one of the greatest war movies ever. They keep Damon's identity a secret, and when his mother answers the door, we can see an American flag obscuring his face. According to the wiki, Spielberg cast Damon because he wanted an unknown with an all-American look. He was cast before Damon won the Oscar for Good Will Hunting, but the film ended up getting released after he'd won. Edward Norton almost nearly played him too, but he ended up doing American History X. Now back with the military, we then hear this.
But we split them up after the Sullivan brothers died on the Juno.
This is a nod of the 5 Sullivan brothers, who all died when a ship known as the Juno ended up sinking. Documented in the film The Fighting Sullivans,
So
these deaths that changed US policy. This then forbid brothers being assigned to the same unit, so that families had more of a chance of being spared from multiple losses. Also read out the Bixby letter, which was written by Abraham Lincoln. In a similar situation, 5 brothers died during battle, though this ended up being proved inaccurate. 2 died, while the others either survived or deserted, so many think the story's been exaggerated. Charging Miller and his company with tracking down Ryan, we then see as he goes to Lieutenant Colonel Anderson.
If we don't offload those dual-drive Shermans by 0600, we're going to have an entire division stuck at Carrot Camp with its pants around its ankles.
This is actually an event we see playing out during Band of Brothers, which Spielberg and Hanks both ended up producing. Dale Dye plays the Colonel in this film, and he also plays Colonel Sink in Band of Brothers. Dale is actually a real-life military expert who set out training regiments for the actors to go through. He also worked as a consultant on Medal of Honor, with him too providing insights on this movie as well. And Nyland was actually part of the 101st Airborne, with Band of Brothers telling the story of East Company. Warren Skip Muck came from that as well, and he was best friends with Nyland back home. It's also here that we finally meet Upham, who we learn's working on a book. This is about...
He blew me in this movie, bro. Like, I'm not gonna lie, he pissed me off.
Between soldiers during war.
He was soft.
This book is what Spielberg and Hanks later looked at, and Band of Brothers is based on that work. After heading out, we then see a wide shot as the group walk through a field. This is later reused when they go to the radio tower at an hour 23. Little clue giving us a gap, as there's 8 men there, instead of the 7 that there should be at that point. Now if we go back to the scene where we panned out and saw all the forces on the beach, you might notice that in the Jeep you can see that there's the gang. In the front of it is Hovrath and Miller, with the latter holding a map. Now there was originally a deleted scene that would explain how they lost the Jeep. Later on, Miller says they lost most of their ammo, which was going to be shown with it being left in the Jeep. Now this scene in the field really lets us get to know the company, and it was the first time that I heard the word FUBAR.
Even if you think the mission's FUBAR, sir?
It's a breather that takes us out of the conflict, and I love the transition between nature and then gunfire.
Yeah, they would be
paranoid.
paranoid.
French-occupied village with wait, is that Paul Giamatti? At the 50-minute mark, we can catch some graffiti that says "Petain est un traiteur," which translates to "Petain is a traitor." This is bringing up former French leader Philippe Pétain, who was seen as being a Nazi collaborator. Here Vin Diesel's Capazzo shot by a sniper, with him being cast after Spielberg saw him in Strays. Vin Diesel wrote, produced, and starred in that movie, with it then opening the door for him to get the career he has. It all goes back to this with his band
I guess so. I don't really like him
his
being
brothers
shot,
that
though.
made him see the importance of family. And we see as Capozzo pulls out the letter that he wants his brothers to take to his dad. This letter carries a lot of symbolism with it, and everyone who holds it ends up being killed. When a soldier takes it, they normally then die, and it gets passed all the way down the line. Wade rewrites it, and it then goes to Miller, with Ryben taking it out of his pocket at the end. None of them were asked to carry it on, but they do so out of a duty to their brother. This shows how the group honor the fallen, and how they'll continue Capozzo's dying wish. Jackson manages to kill the sniper, and we get a scientifically accurate moment with how the shot happens. The sniper first sees the flash and then hears the sound, which is because light travels faster. This is actually a homage to a later war story which happened during Vietnam. US Marine Carlos Hathcock apparently managed to shoot someone through their scope, with Spielberg adding this as a tribute to it.
Is it true that you can see a flash?
Using CGI, but
like, no, I mean the lens flash, because I've seen that a lot. I don't really see a... You know, I'm not going to say because I've never been in it, but how can you see a flash before they shoot? Not the flash when they shoot, like the glare, like from what you see in Call of Duty. How do you see a glare? Like, I don't think that's possible.
I think I'm going to be able to show it. However, what they did is that they put gore on the lens and then had an air cannon pointing out the back of the helmet. The scope then went up and into the eye, which put gore onto it whilst the cannon fired out the back. There's so many incredible scenes here that keep up the pace, and even things like them just stumbling across a group of German soldiers in a room like that. Wait, is that Ted Danson? And they take them to see someone who also happens to have the name Ryan. And wait, is that Nathan Fillion? Yeah, lots of big actors in
like
this,
Gronk
without
at
actually being
first to
Nathan
me.
Fillion's first film. Now they head back on the road and get to the church, which leads to the scene that always
Yeah, a lot of
fucks me up.
famous
I know
faces in
there's
here.
a lot of death and destruction and unforgettable moments that happen in the movie. However, this always gets to me. It's Wade talking about how his mum used to come in from work and see if he was awake so the pair could have a chat. Wade said he'd lie there pretending to be asleep just so that he didn't have to talk to her. He says he doesn't know why he did it, and I think it's something we've probably all done, with this being a moment that's really stuck with me. The character is clearly burdened with guilt, and we see this also carrying across in his final moments. He desperately cries out for his mother as he dies, and wishes that she was there to comfort him. And the next day, they come across some crashed paratroopers and planes. We see Mellish taunting the Germans and flashing the Star of David.
He's Jew.
Spielberg is of course Jewish himself and said he wanted to metaphorically embody this in Mellish. This comes most notably during his death, in which Otham stands at his side and doesn't end up helping. It's been thought that a German killing a Jewish man while an American stands by is supposed to show the US's delayed response to the war. Personally, I feel it just shows that the real soldiers weren't like what we see in the movies, and that they faced incredibly paralyzing fear every single day. Wade also asks Ruben to smell a soldier's wound and tell him if it smells south of cheese. This means it's a serious infection that would likely mean death or amputation.
Yeah.
Sadly, we know that he can't be helped out, so they just have to keep on moving. Eventually, they get word from a paratrooper of where Ryan is, and is that Opie from Sons of Anarchy? Add the beard, and you've got him. Now, here they encounter the radio tower, and you can catch dead cows in the field.
Yeah.
This is something that the Germans carried out due to the Allies using them for meat and milk. Killing cows deprived their enemies of food and made that they had to rely on their own supplies. After making it to the nest and taking the Germans down, we then meet quote-unquote Steamboat Willie. All of the soldiers have a bad feeling, but Miller insists that they had to storm the nest. In an earlier draft of the script, they had the group taking out the nest and then deciding to camp out in a foxhole. That night, German panzers would arrive and also set up a camp right beside them. A German soldier came in and they had Willie converse with him so that the cover wasn't blown. They'd also trade Ryben's Mickey Mouse slider and Mellish's knife for food and water. What we get though is Wade getting shot and the group trying to help him through the pain. Wade asks for 2 shots of morphine and we see as the group hesitate to do this. This is because it's well known the dose would be fatal due to how strong the syrups were during World War II. 1 shot contained a strong dose, with 2 being administered for someone facing death. Wade is saying that he knows he's gonna die and just wants to pass as peacefully as possible. Miller then takes out the letter from his pocket, and at this point they get Steamboat Willie.
Steamboat Willie. Dude.
The group are clearly angry, and there are signs that they were gonna execute him. At an hour 37, we see Willie getting tied up and Jackson begins to tie a sling around his arm. This is typically a rifleman's technique that's used right before an execution. He's surprised when Miller lets him go, but there was a clue to this when he was sat down with Upham. Miller goes to the rifles sticking in the ground and slowly starts to unload them. This is so that Willie can't make a break for them and have a weapon that he could then use to shoot the group. At the hour 34 mark, we also get a picture of the map, which is based on real ones issued to the 82nd Airborne. Here they also start fighting amongst themselves, with Miller finally revealing who he is. Interestingly, he talks about his wife, even though he doesn't wear a wedding ring. In the opening, when we see Hovat chew tobacco, we can clearly see that he's wearing his. I think Miller not wearing it shows he's trying to repress it and not think about the life that he's desperately missing. Burying away, they then come across an armored vehicle, and after it's taken down, we get to meet Ryan. Wait, is that Matt Damon? Now, you kind of get the air that the rest of the cast don't like him, and this was a bit in real life too.
Yeah, I like this, bro.
To go through the rigorous boot camps that took a toll on them both mentally and physically. This allowed them to build a bond, but Damon was never made to do it. This was done on purpose so that the group would resent him, and this would then hopefully come through in their performances. Although Ryan's got a ticket back home, he refuses to leave his unit. Miller then refuses to leave him, and it all becomes about
Saving Private Ryan.
And they get their artillery and talk about how they've got enough TNT to destroy the bridge twice. This comes into play later on as we see them using some of the charges from it to make the sticky bombs at the hour 56 mark. Later on, when the Tiger tank rolls into town, we can see that it's covered in Zimmerit. This was done to stop magnetic mines, which would be able to attach themselves to the vehicle. However, due to them making their own DIY adhesives, they're able to stick them to the ride and blow its tracks off. This is like the war film The Bridge, in which a group have to defend a meaningless bridge against incoming enemies. In the downtime waiting for the attack, they listen to Edith Pafe, who's singing about longing for a lost loved one. It sort of speaks to how the soldiers have left their lives behind and reminds them of the life they're fighting for back home. Orion remembers a time with his brothers in which they saw one trying to get with a girl named Alice. He said she took a nosedive from the ugly tree and hit every branch coming down. It's possible, though, that he could have ended up marrying her, as the elder Ryan calls his wife Alice in the novelization. Who knows, mate, but Damon ad-libbed the story, which was a young actor really getting to shine. The creative team said it wasn't interesting or funny, but that's the reason why they felt it worked. It was just a kid who lost his brothers rambling away and desperately trying to find humor in the despair. It's cut short by the tanks rolling in, and Ryman goes out to check.
Look, Robin! I don't need any luck, Sarge. I was born lucky.
Ironically, he survives until the end and is one of the only characters that makes it out. It's at this point that everything kicks off, like with getting several different perspectives. I think the one that always gets me is seeing things from Jackson's tower and watching him constantly miss his shots. Jackson goes between two scopes, which is what leads to his downfall. Shoutouts to College Dunk 22 on Reddit for pointing out that swapping this is what causes the issues. His U-Ready 8 times doesn't get zeroed when he switches, which means that it's always going to be off. You can kind of see that this is when he starts missing, as the bullets don't go where the target is. Sure, there's things that also affect it, like distance and elevation, but that's the reason why he can't quite hit his targets. It's a detail I wouldn't have picked up, and yeah, if there's any other things involving the weapons, then let me know below. Now, the Battle of Rommel is based on one that took place on the 9th of June 1944. Happening 3 days after D-Day, it had the 82nd and 101st US Airborne Division going up against the 1057 Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Here, Captain John Sauls headed up an ambush that employed bazookas, machine guns, and hand grenades. Disabling several tanks, they ended up retreating but gave a final push against the Germans that took their side of the river. The group eventually received help from the sky, which we also see happening towards the end of the battle. And one thing that people often get confused about is that they think the soldier who stabs Mellish is the same actor as Steamboat Willie.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
Different people, which I only found out when checking through the cast list. I think most of the confusion comes from him sparing Upham, who we see him walking past on the stairs. Upham then shoots Willie later on, which seems to build off the back of that moment. However, the arc still works, as he was supposed to be freed and then hand himself in. Upham was the one who argued against his execution, and here he's deciding that he made the wrong move. This is the only time that Upham fires his weapon, and he ends up letting the other prisoners go. How do you see things from his perspective when we get to the bridge, and we watch it from his point of view as he shoots Miller? This is a flip on the situation from the start, in which we saw things from Miller's perspective.
He went into
it's meant to show that Miller's just another soldier, and though we followed him throughout, he's a small cog in a giant wheel. You might also be wondering what the soldier whispers to Mellish just before he kills him. This translates to, "Give up, you don't stand a chance." Let's end this here. It will be easier for you, much easier. You'll see it will be over quickly. Now, at the 2-hour 27 mark, we see soldiers are reduced to throwing mortars by hand. This is a nod to Charles Kelly, who did it during a fight in Italy in 1943. Kelly ended up receiving the Medal of Honor, with this being one of his most famous acts. It's such a harrowing battle that ends with Miller making his last stand on the bridge, and we see as the tank begins to roll in. This would also influence Call of Duty later on, and it's what inspired the last stand mechanic that they brought into the game. Saved by air fighters, Miller tells Ryan to earn it, and we're left questioning what one man's life's worth. I think it's a sobering reminder to all those that died for us, which is something that we often take for granted. It's important to remember everything they sacrificed, and a reminder to us to not waste a chance we've been given. We see as Ryben takes the letter out, but get a positive note of one being read out in a voiceover. Instead of condolence, it's one informing Mrs. Ryan that their son's been returned. We then go back to an elderly Ryan with them employing state-of-the-art morphing techniques. These had been pioneered in things like the black and white video by Michael Jackson, with them also being used in Terminator 2. As we spin around over his shoulder, we can also catch a grave with a black mark on it, which many have thought represents Jackson's thumb. Bit of a reach that, but it's genuinely something online, and I'll not let it take you out of this moment. He then thanks Miller and says he thinks about his final words every day, and hopes that he's earned everything they sacrificed. I'm trying not to cry. Look, there's some dust in the room. And he asks his wife to tell him he's a good man. She says he is, and we close out to really get focused on the graveyard to remind ourselves of how many people like me and you gave it all up so we could be here today. Spielberg dedicated the movie to his father, who himself was also a World War II veteran. He flew Army Air Corps missions and worked as an operator in Burma. Spielberg did it as a passion project at the time and wasn't actually expecting this movie to be a hit. However, it was, and it netted him Best Director, with it arguably also being his best film. It lost out on Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love, which is often listed as one of the biggest upsets in Oscar history. Harvey Weinstein lobbied against Saving Private Ryan and attacked the movie for its historical inaccuracies. Tell you what though, Harvey, go fuck yourself. In 2015, some Academy members were polled again in order to choose their best pictures of the past. The majority of Academy pollsters said they changed their minds and would have indeed have awarded it if given a second chance. It was also the last film to win the Oscar for Best Editing that didn't use a computer to carry out the work. Its legacy is something that's lasted for almost 30 years, and I hope you've enjoyed us going through the film. Again, huge shout out to Call of War for sponsoring this video.
Wow, man.
Call of War is a free online PvP.
This is dope.
If you've enjoyed it, then please hit the thumbs up, and if you want to see breakdowns like this early, then please click the join button. For 99 cents and 99 pence a month, you'll get early access to almost all of our videos. As long as they're not held back for embargoes, you'll get to see them before anyone else does.
Shout out to this man, dude. Like, the explanation is great. But yeah, like, it was hectic, bro. And that's only maybe what 10 to 25% of what really happened in the war, too. Like I said, man, condolences to the families out there who went through that. But this movie was that movie, man. Like, it's still ahead of its time. And even in 2024, me watching it, I liked it. Like, I typically don't like older movies, but this was a good movie. Comment, like, subscribe down below. It is your boy Black Finesse. We are out.